roll so you can see this.
Oh.
Because the microphone
Okay.
is very quiet. You have a quiet voice. You need to make sure the
I
microphone.
normally don't. Okay. My name is Lori Williams. I am a proud resident of Pleasant Grove. I'm an advocate for transparency and government, and I'm just grateful that you guys are hearing me today. I am not a public speaker. I managed to get out of speaking in church for over 20 years. So this is a big deal to me, and it's very important to me. Because of that, I'll be reading most of my remarks, so please bear with me. I'm here today to restore public trust. There are thousands of dollars not being paid back to us, the citizens. And by my raising some concerns, there has been a lot more found and some improvements. I seek your sincere consideration to do what is right and to provide assurances to the people of Pleasant Grove that our money is not being mismanaged as many currently fear. I won't stop until I get the truth, and I'm just so grateful that you guys are hearing me today. Intertwined and operated as one entity with the city, the Strawberry Days Association has always gone and still goes to the city for direction and instructions. In 2013, an ordinance was passed officially making Strawberry Days Association a permanent city committee, where the city elected officials appointed its chair and vice chair. On September 16, 2016, the Pleasant Grove City Council rescinded and reversed this ordinance during a work session where no comments from the citizens were allowed. And on that date, Attorney Tina Peterson said that by rescinding and reversing this ordinance, it would, quote, go back to the status quo, close quote, as before. There is not much before. The city has always done the appointing and has had the say for most everything. In fact, our city administrator served as the committee chairman for years. I've discussed all of this with quite a few people that are concerned about it. And there's a lot more people that understand government, law, accounting, and finances better than I do. In fact, as of a little over a year ago, I didn't even know what a council member did. I just knew that the mayor was the captain of the town, basically. And so I've been doing a lot of research since then. I've got a fire, I guess. I just want to learn. I seek a favorable ruling that requires the city to get these financial records from the committee it created and it controls, and to provide them to me and the citizens of Pleasant Grove. Only when I and others asked for more information did the city completely reverse its position and start undertaking to hide the financial information that is of interest to the public. I am advocating transparency instead of a single city committee operating in the dark. I am here as an advocate to every citizen of Pleasant Grove who has a right to know how this committee spends our money and other money it generates solely because it's close and the total association with the city. During my research after this hearing, I spoke with Mr. Desai, Prashad Desai. I was reading about a case that was ruled here, and he's a very entertaining gentleman. I know you guys have all talked to him before. After speaking with him and reviewing the case, I understood that he lost due to the fact that the Panguitch Main Street Committee was a legally registered 501c3. In this case, I can prove with documents, with a few documents here, that can prove with documents from the state of Utah Division of Corporations that the Strawberry Days Association has not been a legally registered entity from October 20th, 2004 until this week. On Monday, December 5th is when it was registered. When they had to register as a new entity complete with new entity ID numbers. Incidentally, their entity address that is, they're arguing that is separate. The address is attached to the Pleasant Grove City businesses. So I would hope you would consider that as well. As you consider all of the presented evidence, I ask that you find in the favor of the residents of Pleasant Grove and grant an order opening the financial records of Strawberry Days Association per my original grandma request. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Could you introduce yourself, please,
Yes.
by council?
Thank you. My name is Scott Darrington. I'm the city administrator for Pleasant Grove. With me is Kathy Kresser, our city recorder. Our city attorney, Tina Peterson, who did most of the legwork on this, is currently in the Caribbean on the beach, and I would really like to switch places with her. We are grateful as well for the opportunity to address the committee. We have been working with the Strawberry Days Association for many years to put on, I don't know if it's ever been verified, but the longest running city celebration in the city. That's what it's touted as. And it is something that the city has always been very supportive of and has always worked with the Strawberry Days Association and the what's called the Rodeo Committee Association in putting on this event. As we have tried to comply with the records request, as a city, any dollars that we have spent on this festivities, on the Strawberry Days festivity, is something that we have turned over toward. The question was asked, how much money, how much cash is spent, and where is the cash spent as far as the city participation, and we have given those records to her. We also provide public safety. We provide service from our parks workers when it comes to the week of the festival to make sure that the festival is running well. The city donates, in essence, the time. We pay them as a city, but we donate the time as part of our contribution to the festival for that. And so we put together how much dollar of employee time was spent on that, and we have turned that record over to Lori as well. I think the issue comes up is the actual books that the Strawberry Days Association keeps and runs, which we do not oversee as a city. We don't have those in our record. We don't own them. They have their own financial people. They have their own association. They have their own numbers. They oversee that. We, as a city, don't dictate to the Strawberry Days Association how they spend their money. We don't deem it as our money. We don't use it. In fact, there's a reconciliation at the end of after the celebration is over. Our finance director sits down with their finance person, and they reconcile anything that should be city expense and anything that should be Strawberry Days, Strawberry Association expense. So we've maintained all along. The Strawberry Days Committee was, Strawberry Days Association was incorporated in 1962. They have their own articles of incorporation. I believe we received these materials from our attorney. We do provide our in-kind services. We do pay for certain things, but they do maintain their own banking accounts, financial advisors, and officers. We do the reconciliation and just make sure that everybody, the money is accounted for as to who's what. I think when we get into the 20 minutes, we'll talk a little bit about the Penguich case with Mr. Desai. But we just, really our main argument is we are not the Strawberry Days Association. We did create a Strawberry Days Committee in 2013. That committee made up of members of Pleasant Grove City, made up of members of the Strawberry Days Association and the Rodeo Committee. That committee was formed for these three entities to better work together. There was a time, and I would say in 2013, that we started entertaining the idea of combining this and having the city and the Strawberry Days Association and the rodeo, in essence, become under the city umbrella and have that all be the city and have to a point where I think step one was forming this committee to help with that. So that's as far as we took it. We wrote some draft bylaws. They were never adopted. We never got to that point. The committee, I think, was operating just fine. The three different entities were all getting along and working together. And so I don't think anybody felt that there was a need to take that any further. So when the request comes that Lori wants to see those records, we don't have those records to give. We've never had those records to give. So We denied that just based on the fact that we do not control the Strawberry Days Association. So with that, that's kind of the introduction, and when we get our 20 minutes, if we need to, we can go along.
Right, thank you. Okay.
Okay, I just wanted to kind of have everybody follow along with my timeline, if you guys would. I prepared this timeline. It's very significant to the case. There is overwhelming evidence, and it took a long time to just condense this, because I could go on for days on the research that I've done and the people that I've talked to. I'll start off with January 28, 2011, and I'm kind of I'm doing a history timeline here. Finances were discussed in the budget retreat. A council member asked about rolling back expenditures for Strawberry Days, getting their own private sponsorship. Asked who gets paid on the carnival, and I'm going to go back to the carnival in a little bit, and that's why I just brought that up briefly. Attorney Peterson said the contract is with the city. On November 13, 2012, Administrator Darrington said that normally the city spends about $10,000 a year on a float. The chassis had broken, and they needed to drive the float, and it would be an additional $5,000, not including replacing the old stripped-down vehicle. So then they had an in-depth conversation about Strawberry Days, that they were going to need one, and that's on November 27th. But he discussed in that, he said that whenever there's extra money, they come and talk to him about it. On 11/27/2012, Frank Mills was the city administrator and ran Strawberry Days, and they were all married together. There have been questions about how things are ran and who did what for the past 3 years. Now, these are actual quotes from the minutes, so I'm going to kind of, and then in parentheses I said, it is now currently 7 years that people have been asking about this. The bylaws were from 1952, which were very outdated. They were separating the wards and the functions, and they also they would do their budget and they would report back to the city council. So that was in 2012. The council had always had their thumb on how things were happening. The bylaws were outdated, and Scott Darrington, had written new ones, which are attached. There's also the Miss Strawberry Days pageant and a float which the city funds, along with a pageant and scholarships. The rodeo is part of Strawberry Days and generates more cash than anything, creating some rub. Council member Boyd asked who keeps track of the money, and then we can go and look to cross-reference these minutes. Administrator Darrington said that the Strawberry Days has been using the city tax ID number for IRS purposes. If they become their own entity, they will need to have their own tax ID number. They are not part of the tax audit and probably should be. There is no budget oversight by the city and should be, and all of this will need to be discussed. The insurance has fallen under the city liability, which has been the city's contribution, but if something happens at the rodeo or rodeo grounds, it is the city's responsibility. For the most part, he feels like this could continue to their contribution, but they do need to recognize that there may be things going on that the city doesn't like or agree with and doesn't have control over. The city could say that they need to provide their own insurance, which could be quite a cost to them, especially for the rodeo. One of the things I believe that they haven't gotten their own separate entity status is everything is under the city's liability, the insurance. I actually found the accountant that was discussed in Jason Hunt, who is the accountant for Strawberry Days. He brought up his name and said that he was the former accountant. And I reached out to him, and I was able to interview and talk to him for a long time, and he was so confused as to why I was pursuing this, because he said, why are you, of course they're not separate. And I said, I know, and that's what he was so confused about. He said, every time I needed to use the city tax ID number, I just called Scott. He gave me the permission. There was never a city tax ID number. And so I found that interesting, because he was really confused about everything that was going on, and he was the accountant at this time. And we talked a little bit about how things were done and the finances and how they all work together, but he was very adamant that he himself would have to get permission through Mr. Darrington to use the tax ID number, to get permission on things. So I'm going to go on here. Since the rodeo grounds are owned by Pleasant Grove City, are not consulted when something is being done, there's a communication issue that needs to be addressed. They look to the leadership of the city, police and parks are heavily involved with financial contributions that the city is involved in, whether through personnel costs or cash. Administrator does not know the breakdown of the cost to the city. And then he was talking about the issues where the bylaws need to be revised, a yearly budget needs to be adopted, and they will need to get their own tax ID number. And at one point during all this, I also went in and talked to Tina Peterson, the attorney, and the first thing I asked her was about the tax ID number, and she proceeded to tell me, I have no idea what you're talking about. I have no recollection. I don't know a thing about it. And as I'm going through all of these notes and these minutes, she was either presenting or present at every single council meeting where this was talked about. And over and over again, it is stated that there's no tax ID number, that, we need to get them to be their own separate entity. And so, she even stated that when she gave a presentation on September 6th of this year. So then, the bylaws were drawn up by Administrator Darrington that I don't know if they were, obviously, I don't know if they were adopted. We don't know anything about Strawberry Days. So it also goes to say they also need to define the role of the city and determine a set budget amount, providing police protection, and they give them $20,000. Administrator Darrington took all of the budgets and expenditures from one given year and created a basic budget for them, as well as writing new bylaws, and presented it to them. So this is key to me because he says on page 13, paragraph 4, on November 27th, he said that he went over their budget and he kind of he went over their finances for the year and created a budget. And I was told that they were never ever had access of their finances or their budget or anything. So that was another interesting note. Administrator Darrington stated there were no audit procedures in place or financial controls with the festival. This is quote, Mayor Call said that it is wisest to look at it from a liability standpoint. If something happens, the public is never going to separate Strawberry Days from Pleasant Grove City. We are intertwined in a brand so interlocked that if the city does not take some proactive steps now to ensure that things are done in a proper way, shame on us for not preparing. They do not anticipate anything happening, but if they don't act as if something could happen, then they are being unwise. We cannot prevent something from happening, and something could have happened years ago just to come to light, but they need to be prepared. There is no separating Strawberry Days from Pleasant Grove in the public's mind, but there are some ways for the city to put some protections in place. And then Councilmember Sid Lamone said, Strawberry Days being separated will never happen. Now we're going to just go to January 15th, 2013. There was another discussion put in place, and Attorney Peterson was there. Scott Darrington was leading the discussion, and he had some questions. Should Strawberry Days be a separate entity? So these are his questions that he's asking. Should the city continue to carry liability for the event? They currently do, and there's an increase in liability. Attorney Peterson said their job is to limit their exposure, and if events on city property, they are liable anyways. For documentation purposes, liability reasons, financial reasons, to protect every member of Strawberry Days, the city and everyone involved, it needs to be more organized. And then on November 17th, 2013 is when the ordinance was passed, and you guys all have that. And then I think originally I also supplied the Sterling Codifier where it just said the guidelines that the city committee needed to follow through, which are transparency and their agendas, and on 6/29/2016. So in the minutes, it just says a discussion took place about Strawberry Days. But in the audio, I transcribed all of this. The mayor says, "It might be kind of good to discuss Strawberry Days in general as a city. As a city council and staff, we provide a certain level of support from all the teams." Now, this is just 5 months ago. "We affect all the people that live in the city, and we affect the businesses. I think there's a lot of money involved, and maybe it's a good time to just discuss in general where we're at with the whole thing and kind of talk about where we should be in the future. There's a couple of areas because of the citizens' money that's involved, there needs to be just a lot more coordination and input." Councilmember Anderson said, "Let's have a post-evaluation, and I have some questions. What can we do better? What can we improve?" Administrator Scott Darrington said, I think what we're talking about might be a little different thing. If we're going to get into all the finances and all that stuff, that's a presentation that can be made, and this is what the city spends on it. Cash out of pocket and cash donations. But there's a cost to the city, and here's what Strawberry Days generate in revenue. Jason Hunter runs those books. Denise, or the city financial administrator, can show you what we spend in cash, and the department heads will have to come up with how many man hours are spent, and we'll put a number to that, which was $52,401 was the week of in-kind services just for the police, fire, parks. So she did come up with that. Administrator Darrington said, finances to me are almost a separate issue, and that's just numbers. And we could spit out numbers and say, here's what this costs and here's where the money came from. That to me is a pretty simple discussion that we can have, and if there's some philosophical changes on if we can spend that much money or spend more money, we can have that discussion once you see the numbers. Then the mayor said the finances of the city, and this is a key comment to me. I keep going back to this. The mayor says the finances of the city and Strawberry Days and collectively the manpower are a black hole. I don't have my head wrapped around it and just exactly what that means, and I'd like to understand it. So we're going on, just to my research, over 7 years of trying to understand it. Administrator Darrington said that's not a problem. We can come up with that easy. The mayor said we have a responsibility to be responsible. And then Administrator Darrington said, sure, when the city money is involved. On August 14th, 2016, Scott Darrington and the financial Denise, they hosted the first City Financial Academy, which was awesome. I loved it. So, but the discussion was with Jen Baptista, Councilmember Ben Stanley, and myself, another resident named Stephen Woodwater or something. We were talking afterwards. And this gentleman, who I'd never seen her talk to, started asking about Strawberry Days. And I kind of made a joke and said, for the record, I have never talked to this man or asked him questions, because I had already been asking questions. And he, who I'd never met, started asking questions about it. And as we were discussing it, Administrator Darrington said, well, Strawberry Days uses the tax ID number. Is that what you want to know? I'm like, so there you go. And then I have some attached emails. There's a couple there. And you'll find it interesting, and you can look at it later, that it's an email that Lisa, she's the chairman for Strawberry Days, sends to the Jason Hunter, and it's attached, as Ben Stanley had asked that. The next day he had requested some financials and asked. And as an elected official, he had already been requesting and asking. But then the email that we got back, she got back, was from the financial accountant, and it says, well, we're screwed. So, I don't know what that means, but that's what he wrote back. On 8/16/2016, Grandma requested the city asking for Strawberry Days, so I asked for all of that. 8:30, I submitted a notice to Scott Darrington. That was the same day I had a 40-minute meeting with attorney Tina Peterson. I kind of already went over that, where she denied ever knowing that they used the city tax ID number. She did keep asking me questions about why I was doing this, what was my motive. When I hear words like muddy, intertwined, interlocked, coming from our city attorney, it doesn't evoke confidence in me, because you never, in my mind, you never want muddy or words like that. And she was asking, she said you could open up a lot of skeletons out of the closet. It's hard to know where one entity started and one ended. She also said she wanted to know why I was trying to stop Strawberry Days, and that has never, ever been my attempt, ever. I don't know why that was said, but it is also all over social media. So someone, and I've never discussed anything about this as far as my position on that. I love Strawberry Days. Okay, then on September 6th, the agenda was changed. It was changed just a few days before council meeting. The whole agenda was changed because they were going to do a presentation. In the presentation, there's this a little bit more audio. Jason Hunter says, as I mentioned earlier when Scott was talking, the question has been raised if Strawberry Days is operating under the city's tax ID number. Strawberry Days does have its own tax ID number. That is not correct. That is not correct. Councilmember Ben Stanley is reading some, Councilmember Stanley, he's reading some quotes from the council, like the old minutes, kind of like I was. And Councilmember Sid Lamone is getting angry and says, we get that you are trying to pit people against each other. So say what you have to say and ask your questions. That's why we are all here tonight. That's why we've been trying to do for the past few years is to clear up the confusion. We don't need any past history. It's getting beyond ridiculous. So ask your questions or I'll make a vote to make you stop. Councilmember Lamone went on to say, okay, I'm going to make a motion that we ask Mr. Stanley to stop reading the minutes and could go on and on for the next hour. People have places they need to be who are on the committee here tonight, and I've requested if we need their questions answered, they have an opportunity. I don't know how much longer we could take this. It's irrelevant. Okay, and so after that, they shut him. They made a motion and they shut Councilmember Stanley down, and he's an advocate for transparency and was asking questions and had been asking questions long before I was even asking questions. Following the meeting, as I was leaving, Councilmember Diana Anderson followed me in the parking lot, and I'm not followed like sketchy. I mean, I like her. So she just came out and she was saying, what's the end goal? Why are you trying to do this? And she was asking me these same questions. Are you trying to stop Strawberry Days? And I'm like, of course not. I'm not at all. I'm here for one reason. And I know that they don't have the books, but they need to get the books. I think they should require the books. I think you should require them to get the books. On 9/13, 2016, the very next week is when the ordinance was repealed and rescinded. And then I got my grandma denial. And then grandma requests PG City for all expired contracts from the BBT, any policies related to the retention of contracts. Okay, this is a little side story that is very important to me. With the Bee Boutique, when I was looking at all this information I got, they had the carnival, and the carnival is with Strawberry Days. And then there's some minutes where someone asked in 2011, they said, a council member said, well, who's the contract with, the carnival? Because they're trying to figure out ways if they should cut some funding or things like that. And she said, it's with the city. Well, the contract I have with the carnival is from 2009 to 2013. And it's actually with Strawberry Days. So when I was asking Tina, I said, well, why do you have a copy of it then? Because if you are so separate, you shouldn't have anything that says Strawberry Days on it. Then I was looking at the Bee Boutique contract, and it says that it's with the city. So then I also got all the financials, 3 years of the financials of the city, which incidentally there were four accounts. The Queen's Expenditure, Queen's Strawberry Days Association, Strawberry Days. Now there are 5. There was a new one that was made November 30th, and I'll tell you about that in just a second. The Bee Boutique, I emailed and was asking for old expired contracts. Well, they didn't have any. and by law, they're supposed to keep them for the duration of their life. They didn't have any old ones, and then I had emailed the city attorney, and she said, because I'd been going in, I had been leaving her messages, I was writing her notes, I mean, I'd been going in for weeks. And she told me that with the Bee Boutique, I had gone through the financials, and the contract says $2,500 to be paid within 15 days after the Strawberry Days celebration. And there was nothing that was ever paid to the city. And so that's why I kept going in to talk to her about it. And I was going in to try to talk to our city, Denise. So then she knew I wasn't going away because I kept going every Friday I was there. She said she's having a meeting and with the financial person of Strawberry Days, and she got a check for $5,000 because I only had, on the contract that I've supplied there's only 2 years. It's the 15, 16, 17. And so they did pay back the $5,000 to the citizens. So I was like, okay, there's $5,000 that was actually to the citizens. In my course, I kept asking for old contracts, and she told me that the reason that she didn't have any is because Bruce Chestnut, who was somebody that was going to be retiring or going on I don't know, something, and he wasn't comfortable signing it. He's from Strawberry Days, so Mr. Darrington did. But it was a mistake, and that's why there was only the one contract. Well, I actually contacted the Bee Boutique owner and talked to her, and all of the contracts have always been with the city, and I have expired contract as well, and so I was deliberately lied to by our city attorney. To my estimation, there would be 7 years that are owed to the city from Strawberry Days. That contract was for $2,500, and the whole time there had been, after the years it shows in the financials, I only have 3, unless it shows up somewhere, I know that the Bee Boutique has paid Strawberry Days, but the contract is with the city. And through me badgering and showing up all the time, I was able to get $5,000 of it back. But she repeatedly told me that there was no other contracts because Mr. Darrington had only signed the one, which is disappointing. And there are emails, if you'd like to see. I have 3 emails where she has talked to me about that, and I've requested this. So,
Okay, so
go on. That's
what, I'm going to give you, why don't you just give a minute to sum up? Is there anything?
no. I'm at the end. That was it. Then I sent my appeal to you guys, and that's it.
All right, thank you. Okay, we'll turn the time off. Workers, are there any questions?
Yeah, so you're asserting that Strawberry Days is not a separate entity, that it is part of the city?
Yes, I'm
That's it.
absolutely asserting that.
That's the whole basis for your...
Because they use the city finances, they use the city, they use their land, they use everything. The rodeo grounds are, the city owns the rodeo grounds. And there's no contracts in place with the city, rodeo, nothing.
All right, turn the time over now to the city.
Thank you. It's brought back a lot of memories down through the last 7 years. I started for Pleasant Grove City in January of 2010. The relationship between Pleasant Grove City and the Strawberry Days Association at that time, I would say, was a little different. The city administrator before me, a man by the name of Frank Mills, was the city administrator of Pleasant Grove and also the chairman of the Strawberry Days Association. So he was wearing both hats. I think it was, I can't remember exactly, it was like 10 years in which he wore both hats. I think during that time, there was maybe some, when I say muddy water or confusion as to what the roles were. I think that was something that when I started, I was not the chairman of Strawberry Days Association. I was the city administrator of Pleasant Grove City. In fact, the association, because they are their own entity, they called their own chairman, a lady by the name of Betty Mena. In the process of the Strawberry Days Festival Association moving forward, in 2013, I think they were having some issues. They were some personnel issues. There were some things that, as they approached the city to say, hey, could you help us? This association is a group of volunteers. These are people that are not paid at all. This festival that's put on it's huge. I mean, it's a week long, and there's numerous events, and there's a lot of moving parts. And quite honestly, I think we're lucky as a city that we have volunteers to do this. A lot of cities, the city I came from before I was in Pleasant Grove, in South Ogden, up in Weaver County, we hired an events coordinator, and the city ran the event, and we owned the event. We took the money in for the event. We spent the money for the event. In Pleasant Grove, it wasn't done that way. The association, which has established itself long ago, has been the one that has always put on the event, with the city having our certain responsibilities and our certain contributions. So one of the things that came up here that Lori talked about was the Strawberry Days pageant. There's a beauty pageant, I want to say it's in March. The city does contribute. We pay for the scholarships. We pay for the float that they write in during Strawberry Days and all the other city festivals in Utah County. And that is information that we turned over to her. I mean, that's always been our relationship with the pageant. It's deemed Strawberry Days, but really that is more of a relationship between that pageant and Pleasant Grove City. So I mean, one of the things that I think kind of makes it clear that we're two separate entities is that when Frank Mills retired as city administrator, Strawberry Days didn't, they appointed their own person. So in 2013, as they were kind of having some of these issues, they sat down with me and said, you know, Scott, can you help us out with some things? I said, well, let's talk about your organization. Show me your bylaws. And they call it their bylaws. They're from the 1950s. They hadn't been updated. Let's talk about your budget. What do you have here? And they showed me their budget, just not line items, but just a general accounting of the overview. And so I took a look at that, and I said, well, what do you need help with? Well, their finance person, I think they were looking to get another finance person. I think their other guy quit on them, and they were just kind of stuck in limbo, and they needed some help. So, of course, I mean, we're part of this celebration. We wanted to help. We didn't want to leave our volunteers high and dry. So that's what precipitated. That's why I had the discussions with the city council, because as I started looking into it, there's all these things that encompass in this event. And I would ask the question, what's the city, what's the association, what's the rodeo committee, who's responsible for what? And some of those questions nobody had answers to. And so that's why I brought it back to our city council and said, well, what do we want this to be? I mean, if we're going to have an opportunity here to maybe do this different, this is our opportunity. So we started having those discussions, and Lori pointed out in our 2012, 2013 meetings, you know, we would ask, do we want them to be separate, or do we want them to be the same? Do we want to take over the books and run it through the city finances, or do we not? And step one of that was, let's create the Strawberry Days Committee, which I had mentioned. And that is, let's take the association, let's take the city, let's get the rodeo committee, let's get representation there, and let's define what all this means. Let's define what the roles are. And so we started heading down that road. Was there intent on the city to combine everything at that time? We had that discussion, absolutely. Were we going to go through with that? We never did. We never got that far. Once we created the Strawberry Days Committee, some of their personnel issues kind of righted themselves. Some of these others, they got their new finance person on board. And so as far as the city was concerned, we still have representation on the committee. We're still there. We're part of the discussions. We have to be, because we're an integral part. And so at that point, we kind of, as the city, we backed away from this idea that we want to overtake the event. In fact, we had some association members saying, you know, why are you destroying volunteers in our community? Why would you want to do that? Why why would you take volunteers because the end game for us would have been, we're gonna take it over, we're gonna take the finances, we're gonna hire somebody to run this, we're gonna pay for that. And we stepped back and looked at it and said, this association probably saves us tens of thousands of dollars of man hours and time, city money, city resources. We thought we were getting a pretty good deal. And so we backed off on this idea of overtaking it and creating that. The liability, absolutely, that's another contribution that we made to the city. It's called, we have talked to our insurance company, it falls under our liability umbrella. If something does happen, the city does own the liability on the event. Our city council has said we're okay with that. That is part of our contribution to the event. The tax ID number, and this is my mistake, I think in a lot of ways. When I first started, I was under this assumption that Strawberry Days was using our tax ID number. I've said that numerous times in meetings. I told other people that, and you can read it here. And it was eventually, I think it was our city attorney said, Scott, why are you saying that? What does that mean? I said, I'm not sure what it means. I'm not, I don't, somebody told me that, and I've been perpetuating that, but I don't know. Let's go talk to our finance director. So we asked the finance director, what does this mean? Well, I don't know. Does Strawberry Days, because I think Lori referred to a conversation that I had with, I believe it was Jason Hunter, who is now the finance person for Strawberry Days. And I could have had that conversation with him on tax ID. I don't remember ever giving him the number. And again, I'm not sure what that tax ID number means. Because Jason later corrects in 2016 saying, we don't use their number, we have our own number.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
this is getting awfully confusing to me.
Yes.
I'd like it clarified. I mean, they are incorporated now.
Mhm.
They were incorporated in 2016.
Yes.
So they would have a tax ID number now. But how were they conducting business when they were unincorporated from 2003 to 2016?
I don't know the answer to that.
But they were, so,
They have their own books, how they were accounting
But-
for that, what their responsibilities were to report stuff. As a
Okay.
city, we weren't involved in that.
but they use city property.
Yes,
And in using city and governmental property, they're required to contract with or establish an agreement or contract with the city that they would be using city property. And in that instance, the city, as a governmental entity, would need to establish what license provisions they had.
yeah, I don't think that was ever done.
You
Okay.
never had a contract with them?
We
You never had an agreement?
we have not, no, we don't.
Then how, well, then that would be, yes, then of course you're liable because you're taking on all assumption that this is city business, it would seem. I mean, if you're not in an agreement that this private entity is doing this activity on these government properties, there's no agreement that there's a governmental entity doing, that there's a private entity doing it at all.
Well, I guess the city has always said, well, we're assuming the liability.
Well, of course you are, because you
Yeah.
have no agreement that they're actually
Right.
acting in any other capacity.
Yeah.
You don't have any agreements with them, right?
That's right. No, so that, I mean, this is what we started down the road of. We need to define the responsibilities to make sure that, because, again, before 2010, it was like, okay, who's responsible for what, who's doing what? So we started heading down this road, and we've talked, yeah, we need to define this. We need to have an agreement, but we have not had that agreement yet.
You've never had an agreement.
To my knowledge, no. I don't know if there was agreement back in the 60s or the 70s. I don't know if there
Well,
was,
even, I'm just saying with the period of time from.
not in the last 7 years, no. Yes.
Just ask a related question then. It was incorporated as a 501(c)(3) in 2000, when?
1962.
62 is when the association was created.
So what happened in 13?
So in 2003, it ceased, it ceased being a corporation. And they reinstituted it in 2016. So the period from
Okay.
2004, when you license went out, to 2016, that they were
I didn't work.
unincorporated.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways that goes to the point, and, I mean, it's not like, we didn't feel it was our responsibility as a city to tell the association, I mean, we didn't have oversight to that point as far as,
Whoa. Wait a minute.
okay, go ahead.
Isn't it your responsibility as a city when you have someone using your facilities and have someone doing an activity in your facilities to establish an agreement and to make sure that they are an authorized group? I mean, that's certainly a government function.
Yeah, I would say that when we do that, we require them to provide their certificate of liability insurance and things like that. The city has said, we're not going to require that of the association, we're going to provide that.
But there was no agreement in saying anything.
There has not been, it hasn't, I mean, I agree, we need an agreement, and we need to get this thing figured out. In the process, we don't have an agreement. We don't, yeah, I wish I could say in 2010 or 2013, we got to the point of defining this and having the agreement and just locking everything down, and we didn't do it. So there's, above and beyond the finances, there's a lot of moving parts on this thing that we've got to get figured out. I mean, we're sitting down with the association now, and I'm writing up, here's what the city's responsible for, here's what the association's responsible for. Because it's been operated for a long time for just handshakes and, hey, we're neighbors working together, and there's different legal entities, but I mean, it's...
Are there though?
Yes, I think officially there are.
How is there a legal entity in the Strawberry Days Association? That's my question. How is there a legal entity in the Strawberry Days Association?
They created their own entity.
In what way?
Well, they created the association.
Yeah, they're an ad hoc association. They have no legal status. Had no.
Right, because they let it expire.
Yeah.
I-
You see what I mean? This is
No, I
difficult.
understand what you're
It
saying.
looks to me that
Okay.
when that expired, the city absorbed them. That's what
Well,
that's how it appears to
Are we
me.
deliberating?
We're deliberating. I'm just
Okay,
trying,
yeah.
what I'm saying is, if you're identifying them as a legal entity, my question would be, how do you identify the legal status of Strawberry Days Association? How does the city establish the legal entity that it's a private entity during this period of time? I'm looking for some sort of, other than we trusted them, or we trust,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you're saying, and I mean, I don't disagree. I mean, we don't know for sure, or we didn't ask. I mean, we didn't say, have you guys updated your status as far as association? We never had that conversation with them. I don't know if ever dawned on us we needed to have that conversation. Every January, we get together, the committee gets together, the association, we sit down with the city people, and we plan an event, and we put off the event. They control their books, we control our books, and is that loosey-goosey? Yeah, probably. And are we looking at this, do we need to define that contractually? Yes. But I can't sit here today and say, we did that in 2013 and 14 and 15, I wish I could, but no, we didn't. So,
Did you have a question?
I do.
oh yeah, go ahead.
So as part of your annual budget process or your annual audit, was it ever addressed that this entity was using your tax ID?
Because I don't know if they were officially using their, I don't think they were. I mean, our auditors never,
So it was never flagged?
no, because, again, I think I was the one that was perpetuating that, and I think I was perpetuating something that wasn't correct for my own misunderstanding. Because when I talked to the Strawberry Days finance guy, he says, we don't use your tax ID number. We do our stuff. So I don't know what that means, because I don't know whether they're a legal entity, whether they have their own tax ID number. I mean, he represented in 2016 that they did, but in 2013, I mean, I'm telling people, yeah, they're using our number. But when our attorney asked, well, what does that mean? I said, well, I don't know, that's just what I'm told. When I asked our finance people, well, no, they're not part of our audit, they're their own entity, so there's not like, I don't know if there's something we can pinpoint and say, here's exactly where they used our tax ID number and what that even means. I don't think they're filing their books with the state or whoever they're supposed to report to, and they're using our number. I don't think that ever happened, to my knowledge.
Well, the registration lapsed for 10 years.
Yeah, they're not filing anything, are they? I mean, let's see if I can get back to where I was. So I think where this leads us to is where we're at. In 2016, we did have some inquiries about the relationship and how the money's being used. Our city council turned to me and said, yeah, we want an accounting of how much money we as a city put into Strawberry Days. I think the mayor referred to it as a black hole. He said, I don't understand it, I don't know it, can you tell me what that number is? Sure, we did the research. Here's how much we spend on the pageant, here's how much in-kind money that we have, and we reported back to our council and said, here is the city contribution financially to the Strawberry Days Festival. So that's the context in what they were asking. Our council did say, hey, we would like to know what the association's doing with their money. So we asked the association, you come and present to our city council your financials. Yeah, absolutely. So they showed up and they gave us an overview as to how much revenue they have, how much money they have in the bank, a general sense of how they spend their money. They shared that with us. In fact, the finance person, Jason Hunter, said, if there's any citizen that wants to look at these books, call me up. I'll sit down and look. I'm not going to give you every single number and just turn it over to you, but if you want to sit down with me, I'll go over the numbers with you. Got no problem with that. So I don't know if any citizens took him up on that, but he made the offer in that meeting that if anybody wanted to see the books, that he was up there.
When was that?
That was in, I think that was in our August 30th meeting.
This year?
Or sorry, September 6th meeting.
All right.
So I think that, I think I've covered all of my notes.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Yes. I'm going to read two passages from an ordinance that was passed in 2013 in Pleasantville.
Okay,
I want you to explain it to me, please.
okay.
Whereas the mayor and the council have determined whereas it has become necessary to make some modifications to the organization, planning, and operation of the Strawberry Day celebration. And whereas the mayor and the city council have determined that a standing committee with a board of directors have established bylaws will aid in the successful planning and operation of the celebration each year. What does that mean?
So that was the formation of the committee to start this process of potentially combining these. I mean, that was us saying, okay, we're going to work with the association. We're going to create a committee that is probably going to have the city have a little more say. So from now on, the city's going to appoint the chair and the vice chair of this committee. Like I said, we started down this road. We had some serious discussions about just creating this, and I would say that was our first step, was creating this committee to I would say further explore the process of combining them. So that was our intent. In 2013, that was part of our intent. And I think that was the context at the time of what we were trying to do. So I hope that explains and answers your question as to what we were doing.
So what you're saying here is that really Strawberry Days is a city celebration.
It is a city celebration, yes, and we have a committee now that's made up of different entities to pull that celebration off. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So the committee still exists?
Yep. Yeah, like I said, I wrote some draft bylaws. I don't think the committee ever adopted the bylaws. I don't know what they've decided to do or how to function since then.
But those are committee bylaws, not Strawberry Days Association.
Yeah, the association, they have their own stuff.
Yeah, the
bylaws I wrote
1952.
were for the committee, not for the association.
So as far as the association is concerned, they still have bylaws, we don't.
My assumption is they're still working off the 1952 or 54 bylaws.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none, we'll return to your time for 5 minutes, district for 5 minutes, closing statement.
Okay. First, can I clarify something?
Yes, but
That
just
night
address
on,
it to the
yes,
committee.
yes. That night on September 6th, 2016, Jason, when he gave his presentation, he actually said he would meet with any city officials, not citizens. And then the one that he wanted to meet with him, Councilmember Stanley, he refused to meet with him. And so I did want to clarify that. The other thing, Jason contends, he keeps saying that he has his own tax ID, and like Mr. Darrington doesn't understand if they're running under the tax ID, if they're not. The accountant, Jeff Matthews, he actually asked about the entity update, and he was told by Mr. Darrington that it's all through the city, so it doesn't matter. They had to have a tax ID number to be able to use it for the W-9s, for the B-Boutique that was paying them instead of the city. But I asked him, I said, well, who's doing the taxes? Who's filing? I mean, he said, my understanding, we always use the city's tax ID number. They're a nonprofit status, so it was up to them. I know you still need to file, but it was up to them. So they are all incorporated. There was no tax ID from 2004 to Monday. The city also owns the website that is, and I put that in there as well, 3 weeks after that ordinance that was passed in 2013. I have in there where the city runs and is the administrator, and all the information it's attached to is with the city for Strawberry Days, further showing that they're together. The city's own admission over and over that they had that the Strawberry Days has no tax ID number, and they operated under the tax benefit and the liability of the city. That's why it's so hard that there's no separation, none at all. Anyways, close up there. This all started not with the council just inquiring about how it worked. It actually really, people have been asking for years, and I just have through my documents at least 7 years. When this started in 6/29, it was Councilmember Councilmember Diana Anderson was at the rodeo, and a girl fell through the bleachers. And I mean, there wasn't any serious issue with her, but she was inquiring, whoa, who pays? I mean, what happens if someone were really to get hurt? And so that's how it all started, the conversation of let's, I'd like to know what goes on. And then the mayor saying it's a black hole. There's mountains of evidence, and like I said, I've spent so many hours and time on this, that they are not a separate entity. The efforts that Strawberry Days in the city are going, I feel like it's to conceal evidence. I don't know. I can't even say that these are all paid. These are all volunteers, because how do we know they are? I mean, how do we know anything? Because there's nothing in the finances. There's nothing in their finances because we don't have any knowledge about it. I look at when they talk about the finances with the pageant, and in the financials with the city, there are power bills coming out every single month for the whole year. I mean, Strawberry Days is just a week out of the year. There's garbage bills coming out throughout the year. There are credit cards being used at meters. It's not just as they say, the pageant. I mean, it is so intermingled and intertwined on these, and I'm not an accountant, and so it's just mind-boggling to me. There's just no separation. Anyways, I researched it for months. I am also concerned about the lack of the filing of the tax returns. How do we know what their actual status is? I guess we know as of that they re-upped everything through the Business Utah Division of Corporation on Monday, but that is also under the city's address as well, so, which is interesting enough. Strawberry Days is, that they just did on Monday, is through the city, the address of it. Yeah, I'm concerned they haven't filed any tax returns, and I'm concerned, like Councilmember Ben Stanley said, he asked our city attorney that he is concerned by rescinding and reversing that ordinance if the city would be liable as a backstop for the taxes. And and she said no. In her opinion, no. And I feel like that is just not correct. I feel like there is no separation. And there have been nothing filed, nothing done at all. And that the city will be a backstop, and that will affect us. I would ask that you guys order them to produce those records, and that they be frozen, that nothing is changed or altered and damaged. And I just feel like that would be the right thing to do for the citizens of Pleasant Grove and for our money. Anyways, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you. Will Attorney, 5 minutes.
Thank you. I think it's just important the distinction of the financials as far as the association and the city have not been together. Whether they've filed their tax returns or not, like I said, that's their responsibility. That's not the city's responsibility. They have never been part of our audit. They've never been part of our file taxes, but any sort of our reports to the state, they have never been a part of that. These monies have always been separate. Our mayor, our city council, the city administrator, we don't dictate to the association how they spend that money. We don't tell them, hey, this is city money, therefore here's how it's going to be spent. They have their own budget, they have their own accounting. There are things that we work together on. There are things that are commingled. The finances is not one of them. The pageant, we own it. We pay for that. That's the records of a grandma. There's been expenses throughout the 12-month cycle. We disclosed all that. Lori has all that. So when it comes to the actual costs and things that the city has spent money on, I think all that's been accounted for and given. We don't have records to give. We don't have their financials. Yeah.
I hate to ask this last question, but just something you said. So they have their own money. Do they raise money on their own?
Yeah.
Fundraise?
Yeah, their revenues are, they put on a rodeo. That's probably the biggest revenue generator. They have a pamphlet that they send out that has the program, and they sell sponsorships in that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Here's the thing that goes out. Here's Strawberry Days, and there's people, there's businesses that buy hats from them. That's probably their 2 biggest revenue generators. So they do all that. They handle that. We don't do anything with the rodeo outside of providing the liability for it and having our public safety there in case something goes wrong. But we don't run those events. Yeah.
So in the minutes, it states that there's a revolving line of credit with the association and Pleasant Grove City as co-signer. So to me, that's a financial liability.
What's that from?
The 9616. Attorney Peterson with that.
I think that if I'm understanding the context of that, that's part of the reconciliation that we do at the end of the year. That if there's some expenses that the city picks up for whatever reason, that we turn around and.
It does define that, but again, the city co-signer, to me, I just think it's
I agree with the message. So, yeah, and I don't know what that means as co-signer as far as the definition of that.
I say a joint account.
We don't have a joint account.
I think co-sign means you have joint liability, though.
Yeah.
You co-sign on a loan, you're liable for just like it's.
But like I said, the context of co-sign, I'm not sure what that means. I don't know if we co-sign as far as, when they spend their money, we don't sign anything. we're not party to that.
I think this is referring to a line of credit.
Yeah, I don't know. I wish our attorney was here, she could answer that question. I can't think of an instance where we have given them credit outside of maybe we have purchased something that needed to be done that day or whatever that's come up that the city's taken care of, and then we reconcile it back in. But we don't, to my knowledge, it's not like we say, hey, you have $10,000, anytime you need to spend money on the city dime, go spend it, and then we'll figure it out later. And it doesn't operate that way. So I wish I could explain
So
this.
do they have an office within the city buildings?
No, not per se. I mean,
What
it's
does
just,
that not per se mean?
no.
No, they don't.
No.
So the address, 70 South, 100 East, Post Office Box 421, is not a city address in any way?
70 South 100 East is the city hall.
So why are
Yeah.
they using that as a registering agent address?
You have to have a physical address.
So they're
I would
using the
guess-
city address?
Yeah, they're just using the city address. I don't think that
Well, I mean-
implies anything.
If I had to guess, years ago,
It implies something, but what I'm
Well, okay,
saying is,
that could be-
they had to use an address, and they used the city's address.
Yes.
yes, that's right.
So going back to this statement by Attorney Peterson in a minute, it's a really strange sentence because it says 1991 shows a revolving line of credit. Are we talking about the year 1991?
Yeah. With all the
Well, that would
other.
explain why
I have no idea.
Administrator had no idea.
If there was one in 1991, there was one in 1991. To my knowledge, they do not have a line of credit with the city, at least in the last 7 years.
Hmm.
You know if they have does the association, they have their own separate account, bank account?
Yeah,
somewhere else?
yeah.
So, back to the line of credit thing,
Yeah.
just to clarify.
Okay.
Are you saying, you're saying you don't know what this particular reference means, but are you also saying that there is no such line of credit that you're addressing running today?
Yes, there's, at least in the last 7 years since I've been in Pleasant
Okay.
Grove, there's not something that we're co-signer for the city.
All right.
Signs something like that.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Now we'll turn to the time for the committee to deliberate, which is what we walked into.
Do we leave our stuff here? or-
No,
They're
we
staying.
stay.
Oh.
It's a
We
public
only
deliberation.
close it if we look at the records, and
Sorry.
this is actually disputed as to whether it's a governmental entity or not.
Okay.
So I'm looking at, a lot of confusion, which, and this is not an incorporated entity. And if it's
Yeah.
not a legal entity, I see nothing about what it is. And if the city has a relationship, I think it's taking on a relationship of it being under their purview.
So it talks about the association enters into contracts with vendors.
Yes, it can do that. If it's not an entity, it absolutely cannot do that if it's not an entity.
And it's on city property, so
So I mean, it's one thing for the city to disclaim it, but in fact, they're using it as their arm and vice versa. Because, yeah, if you enter in a contract, you have to be a legal entity, and it definitely was not a legal entity from 2003 or 2004 to
That was
2016. So,
I find the wording in this contract interesting. I'm not real good with contract law, but in 2015, they made a contract with Little B. Craftsman, the city of Pleasant Grove. The city desires to have the following in connection with their strawberry days. It looks like the city absorbed it, at least for that period of time, where they didn't have their own.
and I think the city owns up to Strawberry Days as a city celebration.
I think the city also owns up that this is a mess.
Yes.
That's great.
But I think in the interim, they also have to assume that Strawberry Days was acting on their behalf, because Strawberry Days has no authority, had no authority to act otherwise.
Yeah, but then what? If the city doesn't have the records, the city doesn't have the
Well,
records.
well, there are records,
But
and
According to, yes,
There are
according to
records.
the finance person, the current finance person,
there are records. And I think that I'm persuaded that de facto, because this was not in any way a legal entity, couldn't have operated any other way other than by the city. And so the city has a right to those records. And from the period of time when the Strawberry Days Association was not operating under any other authority except the city's.
So you're saying that we should order the city to produce the records, and if they don't have the records, they should go get the records because they belong to the city.
That is what I'm saying right now. Yes, that's what I was,
I'm just trying to make sure I understood what you're saying.
that's what I was saying. I'd like more discussion on that, though.
Do we have that for?
Well,
I don't know if we can make that leap, but it's clear that, it hurts my head. Just because this is, the Strawberry Association really, without the city, it couldn't function.
Right.
It simply, it couldn't function, but this relationship, I mean, they're separate, but they're not separate. You know, and, you know, we can't do this without the city.
Yeah, I think
And
legally,
it's just-
I think you're right. Legally, they weren't separate because they couldn't operate as their own entity if they weren't incorporated. I mean, I think that's true. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah.
maybe we could.
You have to, you can be an entity without being a corporation.
I'm just listening to this.
Oh, well, yeah, but you're our legal counsel. Yeah.
He's not a contract lawyer either.
A few contracts in my life, thank you.
Well, you know, it's not the case. There are some governmental entities that are, they will be unnamed here, but I know it's an issue. You say, well, those aren't our records because it was a nonprofit entity. Well, in this case, there's not even a nonprofit entity. There's nothing. And so you can have a volunteer group, but a volunteer group can't run a business with the city.
I'll just argue the other side.
Okay, that's what I want.
Not that I necessarily agree with this. I just want to say, okay. I think what happened was the city was operating under the assumption that Strawberry Days was its own entity per incorporation in 1952, and the fact that they, it's not the city's responsibility. I don't think it's the city's responsibility to maintain Strawberry Days registration with the Department of Commerce as a incorporated entity. Now, the fact that they let that registration expire does mean that they're not. I have some experience with this with another nonprofit.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
does mean they're not a legally incorporated entity, and it does mean, but it doesn't mean that makes them an entity of, or part of another entity. It doesn't automatically make them a part of the city's
Right.
entity.
And I'll agree to that. But if you're that other entity that's not the one
Contracted,
that's last,
yeah.
if you're allowing this other entity to do Strawberry Days, which is a citywide celebration, using city land, using city facilities, and reconciling accounts at the end without verification that that's an entity, that's on you.
Mhm.
But did they buy it? Did the city buy it when they started transacting business with them?
I think-
And not knowing, I mean, did they become part of the city, I guess the question that I have.
Well, I don't think a governmental entity, and that's only because my association with the state, that if we're dealing with relationships with non-governmental entities, we must have a contract, we must have an agreement of some sort.
And we would do your
And
responsibility.
isn't that the same on this local government level? And if you don't, I think you are assuming, well, this is just really acting on our behalf. Because your city certainly wouldn't engage in, oh yeah, we'll let this group come in and just do this in this building and we'll just say fine.
I think we have the responsibility to make sure they were legal.
Well, I'm not making a motion,
Okay.
but I do want to say that this is, what we're talking about is very detailed ramifications of contract law, which there's no expertise on this committee. We're not authorized to interpret contractual relationships under the statute that authorizes us, as far as I know. And so right now, I'm not sure what kind of order we can make to the city, other than, I mean, we can make an assumption. I think there's plenty of grounds for the city to challenge that legally somewhere else. So I think what's going to happen if we order them to produce the records, because we believe that the records were created, if the records were created, whether they're in their possession or not, they own the records because they were basically legally engaged. And then we can say that, and then they either have to work with Strawberry Days to get those records, or they have to go to court and say they're not our records, and then let the court figure it out. So I haven't made a motion,
Oh,
but
that's fine, and I would say though, that if you were really independent and a nonprofit organization, you would use FedEx or UPS as your physical address, because they offer that, and you wouldn't use the city address as your,
that I
corporation.
totally understand what you're saying. I totally understand what
So-
you're saying. I think if they want to be perceived as a separate entity, they should use the city's address.
And if you were really nitty, there's businesses that provide the physical address for you to use in those cases.
Well, it's like the city allowed them to do these things, they allow this relationship to be what it will become what it has. And it's now.
It's true.
We need to fix this, we need to clean this up.
Right, and it sounds like there's efforts being made to fix that, but
There
at
would
the
be a lot of
time,
that.
at the time of the records that we're talking about, that wasn't a
Yeah.
fixed thing. It's still not a fixed thing. They've just
It's
taken
just-
one step and reincorporated Strawberry.
So.
You're gonna make a motion, right, Tom?
I will make a comment, I don't know if it's part of the motion or not, but because it was brought up, this is just my perception again, as a layman. I think the fact that there was an association, I don't think the fact that hasn't been contractually obligated gives the city a backstop. And what I would do, if I was Western Grove City, would be to get that information. Because I think information would be powerful for them. That's something, I'm not saying we ordered to do that, but I would just do that. I would say I'd want to know what all that.
I think there's a lot of strength to the argument coming from Trish and Cindy that the city had an obligation to ensure that they were doing business with a legally incorporated entity. And since they didn't do that, they kind of took on liability whether they intended to or not. And so, I'll just go out on a limb and I don't know, I'm not ready to go out on a limb on a motion because I don't know how I would back that up with statute.
Well, I think what we're defining is whether it's a governmental entity. And a governmental entity, the definition of a governmental entity in 103, 10, 11?
I think we have it in our thing here.
I should know that from the top of my
It's,
head.
it's,
Oh, it's 11.
it's 11, 11.
103.11, governmental entity.
Has an immense definition, immense, and deep. And so if I am persuaded, I'm just gonna say, I am persuaded that the governmental entity didn't make a contract with someone else. It didn't make a contract with a private entity. And in not doing so, there is, I mean, it assumed all the responsibility, including the records of the Strawberry Days. Now, whether they fix that in the future, that would be good. But there's no, and that is an obligation for government, is when they are dealing with outside groups, so they establish those boundaries and that they are clear. And if you don't do that, that seems to make an assumption, and especially since they're using the city address even now, that they're so intertwined that they are in fact part of the governmental entity. Because it's not just, it's every department, it's offices and boards and et cetera, et cetera. This is a city operation. Strawberry Days was acting as on behalf of the city. Because the city didn't contract anyone else to do it.
Okay,
That's what I would do. That's
I
my
would
perception.
move that the committee,
And I'm dealing on a state level, but I'm really pretty sure it's the same on municipalities. So,
okay, I would move that the committee orders City of Pleasant Grove to produce the financial records of the Strawberry Days Association. Because, citing Grandma 10311 B.I. Based on the fact that Strawberry Days did not maintain its own entity status, and the fact that the city basically operated Strawberry Days, was the only legal entity operating Strawberry Days, that they're talking about records, whether they maintain them or not, they're records that were maintained by an entity that is essentially part of the city, for lack of its own entity status.
Just clarification for me, just to make sure. Are you saying they're either funded or established by the city? Which one are we going under? Since that's what the statute has.
I would say
well,
they're funded by. I think that's the most obvious. They're funded by.
or you could say, carry out the public's business.
Yeah.
It's established. It's funded
But
or
it has to be
established.
funded or established to carry out the public business. So you have to either be funded or established in order to carry out the public's business. It can't just be carry out the public's business. It has to either be funded and or established by.
I think it's
It's
both.
Establish it by
I think it's
ordinance.
funded and established.
Well, establish it by ordinance and.
Well,
It's
it's
all-
all the committee.
The committee.
Right, but the committee recognized Strawberry Days as part of that committee, and Strawberry Days didn't legally exist. I
And,
guess.
and so it was also funded in the fact that they used
City address.
city
Public
facilities,
grounds,
built
yeah.
city contracts and so on.
Okay.
Okay, we have a motion before us. Is there a second? And then we can get more clarification. There's a second from Cindy? Okay, so are you clear then on any other things that we should clarify?
No, I'm
This
good.
is your opportunity to help us out.
You guys are doing a great job.
For me, we're saying that they established a committee to run Strawberry Days, which is running a public business, or the public's business.
Okay, did the city
I say-
establish the committee?
No, I say
Well, they established the committee by
there was a
city
committee
ordinance.
that overran it.
Oversaw them. Okay.
And I
And
think-
because at that time, there's no corporation.
And there's
the
no
city is running
corporation.
Mhm.
it. Okay.
They funded it in the fact that even if Strawberry Days, why somehow had its own checking account, certainly the
It was still
city
providing city facilities
certainly
to
funded
allow
it and
them to
underwrote it in
operate,
many
right.
ways.
Which is probably different than Days of 47 for Salt Lake City, correct?
Yes.
Because days of 47 are completely separate.
And is incorporated and has a contract with the city. Yeah.
Well, and I think part of the, when they went to the city administrator, I don't remember when the date that was quoted, but they wanted to sit down with, they needed some help getting their financial house in order. Well, one of the things that they should have looked at that time was, well, you're not legally incorporated. I'm not saying that did or didn't happen, I'm just saying that should have happened. But yeah, I think by default, it was a city entity until it wasn't in 2016.
So those records belong to the city, whether they're in one office or the other.
I mean, I don't particularly think that's a perfect argument, but it's the best one we could have. Under the statute that authorizes it.
I have to agree.
So that's getting to the definition of record, saying that the city is still able to, it was either prepare, own, receive, or retain the records.
Which,
The definition of record,
103.22A.
which is, it's an or. And so I think we could say that the Strawberry Days Association is maintaining those, but being de facto under the city is the issue.
Therefore,
Goes
the
up.
city has ability to control it as a record. Okay.
Right. Okay, any other discussion? If not, let's call for a vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Say nay.
Nay.
Okay. So the motion, there was just one nay, is that correct? Okay, the motion passes. There will be an order drafted in 7 business days and sent to all parties. There's a 30 days appeals period after that. So I want to thank all parties coming here today to appeal to the State Records Committee. Thank you for your time and your effort.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. To the extent that we did it here. So